Welcome back to Refinitiv Perspectives Live. We are at episode number 13 now with our dear colleague and lead analyst at Refinitiv, Jose Clavijo, with the subject agriculture.
Thanks for having me. Hello.
Welcome, Jose. Nice having you here, and thank you for sharing your insights on that specific topic. I'm directly going to dive into my first question in regards of agriculture. I mean, when we've been talking about 2020 and outlooks in 2021, since the whole world has been changed by COVID and the pandemic itself, what happened to agricultural markets last year? So in 2020, what sectors were the most impacted, you would say?
Yeah, that's been the big topic on everyone's minds. The COVID pandemic had very significant impacts on the agricultural markets, though, of course, the severity varied widely by the type of commodity and the specific portion of the supply chain that we're talking about. Lockdown measures during the initial months of the pandemic led to depressed incomes and demand for most agricultural products. So, in broad strokes, in general terms, we initially saw larger demand drops for things like animal products because of their higher value, but also things like fresh, perishable agricultural products than, say, changes in cereal production. We also saw shortages of many food items that I'm sure you remember experiencing yourself in retail shops that more often than not, as in the case, say, for wheat flour, were not due to things like shortages in production or in stocks, but mostly because things like wheat that are sold commercially is mostly geared to supply the service industry, which has completely different packaging and in some cases processing requirements than the flour that you and I might want to buy in the store to bake a cake. So, the disruptions varied widely, but they overall were not really there due to big concerns around production itself. Now, overall, the things that we just talked about really led to rises in food prices that we hadn't seen since 2008, since 2011, 2012. That, fortunately, as that first wave kind of came and went, and countries and the supply chains started adapting to this new normal, we saw those food price increases kind of stabilize a little bit.
When was that, more or less? Do you know?
Around, after the second wave, so around the kind of, say, the northern hemisphere summer, we kind of saw things kind of subdued and calm down a little bit. And then after that period, we saw not just the kind of the normalization a little bit of things, but also other global factors kicking in that led to higher demand demand starting to pick up overall, and a bit of a correction, stabilization on food prices. And so again, while we've seen food prices kind of stabilize a bit from those, we are still right now seeing a pretty sustained agricultural commodity price rally that again began right after that period around the fall and is still with us now.
And I mean, indeed, when we're talking about that we're seeing very high prices for most agriculture commodities, what's behind that? Because we've already talked about COVID, but what other factors are driving this price surge?
Yeah, so there's been two big things, right? Changes in demand and in production itself. For the first one, we're seeing a lot of the biggest agricultural importers, like China, who is the biggest agricultural importer in the world, increasing their purchases in international markets. Most of this isn't necessarily to meet surging consumption demands itself, but it is more due to the need to replenish stocks that were depleted during the pandemic to maintain food price, to help that food price stabilization that we were just talking about. And also in some cases, a country like China is actually seeing what's going on and is reevaluating the size of their strategic reserves. So they want to have slightly even bigger reserves than what they were having before. So we're seeing a lot of demand being spurred by that need to like kind of recover from what was used during the pandemic when supply chains were down. But in a country like China, which again, we'll talk a lot about because it's just the biggest importer in the world, we also had other factors. So for instance, in 2018, we had the African swine fever outbreak, which led to the culling of over 200 million pigs and kind of the decimation of the swine industry. Now, that has recovered to an extent that I think very few people could have imagined at this point. So already by November, I think they had recovered about 90% of the national herd and are expected to fully come back to 2018 levels by the next few months, which means they're going to need a lot more soybeans and other feed ingredients to meet the demands of that growing herd. In addition, again, to speak about China, one of the other big things that has been really shaping the global markets has been the situation between the U.S. and China trade war. As part of the phase one agreements that were struck about a year ago with the U.S., China had pledged to purchase 80 billion worth in ag products between 2020 and 2021. And, there's been a lot of concern if China was in fact going to be able to meet those pledges. And while starting around the early fall, it didn't really seem like it was going to happen, and purchases from a lot of agricultural goods from the U.S., but especially soybeans, pork products, dairy products, nuts, has really risen over the past few months. And while they're still not on track as far as the latest data that we have to fully meet those figures, they will come pretty close. Which again is really helping boost that high demand that is maintaining those agricultural commodity prices high. I guess finally the important thing that we need to talk about as well that's been keeping those prices super high has been issues around production. Last week, the USDA released its final outlook for the size of the U.S. corn and soy crops. And needless to say, it surprised the markets. It came down significantly from the latest figures published in November, below what even some analysts like our team, which had one of the lowest forecasts in the summer for U.S. corn and soy production, and they came in even lower. So indicating that global production of corn and soy was going to be substantially less than what the market was anticipating a few months ago. On top of that, the next biggest group of exporting countries of corn and soy, so countries in South America, Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, have seen a less than ideal production season that's been marred by dryness coming from La Nina. So again, we're in a situation there, as we've been warning in our own research for several months, that production is going to be less than what a lot of folks in the market were anticipating a few months ago. And even for a crop like wheat, where production levels are actually pretty high, there's concerns there as well. I mean, all of these commodities tend to push each other up, but in the case of wheat, there's been other concerns. There have been export quotas that have been introduced by some countries to restrict the amount that gets taken out of the country to maintain national level stocks and food prices stable. So that has also kind of helped pressure and maintain those prices really high.
I mean, looking forward, can we really expect the rebound of the agricultural markets to last through 2021?
Yeah, I think so. I think if there's anything we can expect in the next few months and throughout this year, is for those prices to, at least in the short term, over the next several months, to probably stay pretty supportive. But also overall, there's just going to keep being a lot of volatility. I mean, we've had very positive news with the ongoing vaccination campaigns throughout the world. But despite that, we're in a point where in most countries, the pandemic is really as bad as it has ever been. And so, I think, as I was saying before, in the short term, that rally in prices is probably going to stay there for a while, especially if the dryness that I was talking about in the southern hemisphere comes back. There's been a bit of a favorable rainfall across those countries that I mentioned before in recent times, which has kind of kept things from production projections from dropping too low. But the next few months are really important for both corn and soy. And if dryness comes back, that can mean more trouble on the production side. And then, of course, I think it's also good to think, well, rising prices also encourages farmers to plant bigger crops, which means right now the second crop of Brazil, which is about 70% of the total corn production in the country, or maybe even a bit more, gets planted right around now. So farmers in Brazil are seeing this price signal and might increase the amount that they plant. Not just that, but farmers in the northern hemisphere are in the process of planning what they're going to do come spring. And this price rally is going to really encourage people to plant more and to invest more on those crops. So not skimp on fertilizer, on crop protection in a way that they might be more cautious in years where prices might be more at risk. And it also allows farmers to really invest also a bit more in longer terms, which is really important because farmers have seen depressed agricultural commodity prices for a really long time. So in places like the US, there's a lot of farmers that are under a lot of financial pressure. And so this price rally can really help a lot of people.
Yeah, and I mean, yes, please continue.
Yeah, no, and then of course, again, while this is something that's really positive for farmers, the reality is that it will mean that that volatility and those high commodity prices will probably also sustain at the local level high food price inflation, which, as we all know, in these types of crises tends to impact the global poor disproportionately, and not just in least developed countries, but also in richer nations such as the UK, for instance, where reports in the media are pointing out to an increase in usage of things like food banks or benefits to access food. In fact, I was reading statistics from the World Food Program of the United Nations, and they suggested that by late 2020, they were already expecting an additional 137 million people that are acutely food insecure throughout the world. And so that is extremely, extremely concerning, again, despite this kind of slightly more positive economic environment.
No, there's always the other side of the medal, probably, but it all comes with challenges and then of course advantages and disadvantages. But in general, what do you expect? I mean, your personal opinion on that. What do you expect throughout this year? Let's say just 2021.
That's a good question. I think speaking about agriculture, I think it's been clear that the agricultural sector, governments, and the private industry, I don't think they've done. I don't think that enough has been done to tackle some of those problems around food price increases that we've discussed. I don't think enough has been done as well to protect all of the frontline workers in agriculture, that just like frontline workers in so many other sectors have seen the worst of this pandemic and are the folks that are putting themselves out there every day to harvest the crops, process the foods, and put them out so that we can all continue to live throughout the pandemic. So I would really hope that governments and the private sector do a lot more to help address a lot of these issues that we've seen exposed, that were there beforehand and have just been worsened by the pandemic. So like on a personal level, that's something that I would really, really like to see addressed and change more in 2021 for this pandemic and for future crises like the one that we're experiencing now.
I mean, speaking about the government, I expect a lot of people not maybe, putting these two puzzles together or these two pieces of the puzzle together, but obviously the government has a big impact, and not just only in regards of regulations or what we might think of for the first place, but now taking a major change that's been happening now with Biden being the next president. What changes can we expect there?
Anytime there's a change in the U.S. administration, that will have repercussions across all sectors. And agriculture is no different. I think on the balance, most people would say that agriculture had a pretty hard time under the Trump administration. First and foremost, because of the way the trade war was handled with China, that led to significant deficits in exports. It's led to losses in jobs, and as you know, overall, I would say most people in the agricultural sector would say that it's been overwhelmingly negative for the sector in general, despite there being good support at different times of that impasse with China for farmers. I think overall, in big picture, I think it's been pretty negative. The Biden administration is bringing on an experienced head at the USDA, at the United States Department of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack, who held that position during the Obama years. So I think it was in some ways it was a controversial pick, because typically you don't get someone repeating in a position like that in the U.S. government. But also I think the markets overall will feel like it's going to be business as usual. I don't think there's any major changes, big changes in policy that you can expect. And again, I think the markets will see that as overall a positive sign, especially given that Vilsack has worked very closely with the big agricultural industry as well. He's just coming off from being the head of the U.S. Dairy Export Council, which is a massive trade group. So I think he's a known quantity, which I think the markets tend to appreciate. Of course, on the other hand, there's a lot of folks that rightfully point out to some concerns around what his nomination might mean for reforms that are needed to benefit smallholder farmers, or some environmental concerns that are always a big pressing issue.
Obviously,
at the policy level.
Yeah, and
right.
Sustainability and all that plays a bigger role now also in
exactly. And of course, it's very possible that I think the Biden administration could go back and start revising some of the details and aspects of foreign trade, especially with China. So there's definitely a lot of uncertainty there, but I think overall, most people in the market will be, pretty happy, I would say, with
more positive. I would like to give one last question to you, which is on a personal level, or let's say with your personal experience in the agriculture sector. What do you maybe not wish for, but hope for in terms of changes within 2021? Is there anything that you would like to, obviously there are things that you would like to see or changes that you like to push, but what do you see as one of the most important things that have to change within this year?
Well, I think a little while ago I indicated, this is a bit, again, very, very personal topic, slightly less about the markets, but again, I would really like to see a lot more done to address, protecting and improving conditions for frontline workers in agriculture. Those are, again, the folks that overwhelmingly have seen a lot of the worst impacts of the pandemic within the agricultural sector. And I don't feel that enough has been done in the business sector or by governments to ensure everything from better working conditions, better pay, that will, ensure that the people that are putting so much at risk to keep the food system going can work under everyday conditions, but especially under a pandemic and under much better conditions than they do now. And that, again, is work conditions, immigration, which was also a big problem during the Trump administration. The strict restrictive immigration stance that was, present throughout that administration hurt the farming sector in the U.S. significantly, because like the farming sectors in so many other countries, especially in developing nations, they really depend very heavily on immigrant workers in farms, in processing plants. So, again, on a very personal level, I would really hope that governments and businesses address all these issues in 2021.
Thank you for your insight. It's been great having you on the show. I don't want to take too much of your time, so thanks for joining. Maybe we can have you on another episode with a bit more details on that subject. It's super interesting to see and get your insights on that. So thank you for joining us and giving us a bit of a detailed view on the subject agriculture.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Shahad. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, you too. Thanks everyone for joining, and thanks for listening. So if you enjoyed this episode, you can get access or complimentary agriculture reports by scanning the code or going to the link on the screen now. And as always, you can stay tuned for the next episodes on the hour in about half an hour, when we will be talking about Brexit.